Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. Okay, way more dynamic. Okay, so in this photograph, you're standing on a stage. It's a shot from the audience, probably a school amphitheater. Not a huge, not an immense stage or theater. Probably houses about 1 to 200 people. In the audience, you can see the heads of all these heads sort of looking at you. Most of them are female. On the screen, it says "Fearless Mentoring, Developing Tomorrow's Leaders," and so you're addressing the audience. It's called. Oh, look at that! Okay, so the title of the photo is "One Woman Fearless Summit in Victoria, British Columbia." Take it away, Doug.
So it was an opportunity that was given to me to speak to the One Woman Fearless Summit in Victoria. So I was given the opportunity to speak to this, and this was significant and important to me because I believe, if my memory serves me correct, that I was the only male speaker throughout that whole day.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that my presentation, for me, it was something that I remember because I did it without the use of PowerPoint. So I
Mm-hmm.
spoke for, I think it was 20 minutes with unscripted.
Yeah.
In fact, not totally unscripted, because I remember now on a napkin I had written sort of what the points were, and I put that on the podium,
Mm-hmm.
and then I never went back to the podium
Nice.
after that. So I shared with them some mentoring experiences that I had with, ironically, because I had done some work with some very gifted women that I had worked with. And so I shared sort of the general concept or the general idea of what it was we were discussing. So, excuse me, one example was how a young lady got referred to me by another mentor and how we went through the initial meeting, and me very quickly realizing that here we had somebody who was dealing with self-esteem, self-confidence
Mm.
issues, and I needed to figure out, okay, what's our plan of attack going to be, because we need to get this person back on track. And so it was a matter of, going through their resume, which was a resume that was very negative, and so we had to change that. We had to go through kind of a personal growth makeover where I needed to get them to a place where they believed in themselves just as much as I believed in what they were capable of doing,
Mm-hmm.
and we were able to do that. And even some simple things of taking post-it notes and sticking them on the bathroom mirror with positive affirmation statements written on them to help get
Mm-hmm.
the person starting their day in the right context. And we did all of that. And once we cleaned up the resume and made it more positive for people, for hiring managers to pick it up and read it, she got, I think, 3 or 4 interview opportunities within a couple week time frame. And then one turned into an offer. And then the offer from there turned into an opportunity at head office in Ontario. And then she's had a couple other opportunities since then, because we still stay in touch, and periodically we'll set up a virtual chat. But so it was stories like that that I shared with those that were in attendance. There was about 125 women that were in the session,
Mm-hmm.
so which was good. And I had my first book that I had written, The Gift of Mentoring. I had, I think, a dozen or so of them, and I gave those away at the seminar. And I found it very interesting. Was I said I only brought 12. So I'm going to, when I'm done speaking, I'll be up in the lobby, and it's kind of first come, first serve. And there was there was actually it was a little bit of pushing and shoving going on to get to the front of the line.
Nice, nice. Wow. Okay, so the point of my podcast is to inspire others. if life really is a gift, how do we make every second count? I assume that in that speaking engagement, you're essentially giving them tools and ideas and just sharing, because it's very strange when I look at the image, okay, in terms of what's actually happening. A whole bunch of these human beings are seated and they're all being quiet and they're all like staring, looking forward at you. And then there's this guy on the stage talking and just sharing ideas. And somehow, like you're communicating concepts that are in your head that they're listening to. They enter the room, and then each individual person connects or disconnects with what you're saying. It's a strange sort of feature of how brains work, that essentially the work you do to survive and to earn a living is to sit with people and just talk. And the conversation at the beginning of the session is, or like your mindset at the beginning of the conversation is one way, and then half an hour later, just by the exchange of words, all of a sudden you've sparked something in that other brain to potentially change their whole life, right? So how about you talk about what the potential is, like about that moment, like why the magic of a conversation?
Well, what's really, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the I had a couple at that session in Victoria. I actually had a couple wonderful people come up to me afterwards and say, "Thank you so much for what you shared. I saw myself in that story that you shared."
Mm-hmm.
And it's given me a different perspective on how I want to deal with similar situations going forward. It's also given me, a different perspective on situations that I'm dealing with right at this very moment, and different approaches that I can take. And oh, by the way, can I get a copy of your book, so to speak?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea behind why I feel that I have success is I have obviously a significant amount of lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
And my objective is to be able to take those lived experiences and kind of shape and model them into a story,
Mm.
because we all relate to stories a lot more easily than we do if somebody, has a list of bulleted points and says, okay, if this happens, do this, this, and this. Where if it's me that's doing that, I am talking about actual lived experience that I've gone through, and perhaps how it's impacted me as an individual, not
Mm-hmm.
only, today, but tomorrow when I go to deal with something similar, I'm going to quite possibly respond a different way than I would if I had not had that lived experience.
Right. I think it's really interesting in terms of how we came to meet and the sort of the chasing of back and forth and the annoyingness of the time difference, that I'm ready at 3 o'clock and you're ready at 5 o'clock, and it's like, okay. So then you're now a kind of, I know it might feel weird to hear, but now you're a kind of elder who sits with others to mentor them because you have this experience behind you. Now, let's bring you back to that first year on the job as a police officer. So you've gone through training, you're going out as a police officer. How is that brain of yours from back then and that perspective of yours from back then, how is that connected to who you are now in terms of how were you a mentor back then? Because in a sense, it's like you've matured into who you are. So that means that maturity came from some earlier state. So why don't you bring us back to that earlier state to hopefully maybe have somebody listen who's listening to this will be like, oh, I can recognize myself in that as well.
When I think of my first place that I worked as a police officer, I actually ended up at one time point. So I took my training here, ironically, here in Regina, Saskatchewan, the home of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And my very first posting was to Prince Rupert in northern British Columbia, and it was a large detachment. It was probably 20 plus police officers, and so we had one police officer that was always dedicated to what they called court liaison. So you worked with the prosecutors and you worked with the provincial court judge and that. And I think when I think back now, when you brought that up, I was thinking, okay, so how did my first year shape? And actually, what it did was I had to build a relationship with that judge in order to be able to effectively deal with cases that we were going to be bringing before him in his courtroom. And I needed to be able to learn how to be respectful of somebody in a position like that. I needed to learn how to communicate very effectively with somebody like that. And in some cases where you wanted a certain outcome to take place, I needed to be able to, where the communication kicked in, I needed to be able to do that. That was the start of a couple different opportunities that I had where I was in a similar like court liaison position where I was afforded opportunities that a lot of people didn't get.
Mm-hmm.
And a large part of that was because of, number one, my ability to build relationships, and number two, my ability to communicate effectively, which are all qualities of an effective mentor.
Mm-hmm. Doug Lawrence, look, I'm sure we barely scratched the surface of your work and your life. And let me just repeat the title of your book, which is the phrase that I use all the time to my colleagues' chagrin was "You are not alone." Okay, so mental health mentors and the journey with you. Doug Lawrence, thank you so much. It took a while for us to get here, but I really appreciate it.
Well, and thank you for the opportunity. A deep discussion on a Saturday, as you've noted, but well worth it.
So, is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So, if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.